Nick Reiner grew up in a world most people only see on television. Surrounded by Hollywood lights, fame, and wealth, he lived a life that seemed perfect on the outside. His father, Rob Reiner, was a celebrated actor and director, known for his work in Hollywood classics. His mother, Michelle, was equally loving and attentive, making every effort to provide Nick with the kind of support that money could buy. They tried everything to help him, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on therapy, rehabilitation programs, and mental health support. From a young age, Nick struggled with emotional instability and mental health challenges, and his parents never gave up on him. They believed that love, guidance, and care could save him, and that as long as the family stayed together, there was hope. However, despite all their efforts, the situation slowly worsened. Over time, Nick's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. Family members noticed changes in the way he interacted with others, how he reacted to ordinary situations, and how he expressed his emotions. Sometimes he would act withdrawn and distant, and at other times he would become agitated, aggressive, or overly intense. His moods could shift rapidly, and no one could always predict what would trigger an emotional outburst. For those around him, it became clear that Nick's struggle was deeper than what rehabilitation or therapy alone could fix. On one hand, the Reiners were a family who had access to some of the best help money could buy. But on the other hand, no external support could entirely prevent the challenges Nick faced. They tried to balance care with boundaries, understanding with discipline, and attention with privacy. As the months went by, Nick's instability became a concern not just within the home, but also in social situations. One night, a few weeks before the tragic events, the family attended a Christmas party hosted by Conan O'Brien. Many famous Hollywood actors and friends were there, including Jane Fonda. Nick was not officially invited. His parents, worried about leaving him alone, brought him along to ensure he stayed in sight. They hoped that surrounding him with familiar people and a controlled environment might calm him, or at least allow them to monitor his behavior. But the party did not go as planned. Nick's behavior drew attention immediately. He wandered from guest to guest, asking strange questions about fame, inquiring about people's accomplishments, and sometimes interrupting conversations in ways that made others uncomfortable. Several guests even mistook him for a stranger, unaware that he was the son of the host's close friends. The situation escalated when he had a serious argument with his father in front of everyone. Voices were raised, tension filled the room, and what should have been a night of celebration became a moment of unease and confusion. Rob and Michelle, embarrassed by the scene, apologized to the host and left the party early with Nick. This would be the last time the family was seen together publicly. The signs were there, but they were subtle, easy to overlook, and hidden behind layers of love, fear, and concern. Nick's instability, the arguments, and his unpredictable behavior all pointed to a growing crisis that the Reiners struggled to manage. No one could have anticipated what would unfold hours later. The following morning, the tragedy began in their luxurious Brentwood mansion. According to reports, Nick entered his parents' bedroom while they were asleep. Using a knife, he carried out an attack that investigators describe as deliberate and methodical. Rob and Michelle were caught completely off guard. In their familiar, safe home, the wounds inflicted were not accidental or hasty. They suggest repeated, controlled actions, Experts reviewing the case noted that the combination of stab and slash injuries indicates someone acting with intent, someone aware of each movement and strike. The attack was not impulsive, not a moment of uncontrolled rage. It was sustained, focused, and terrifyingly deliberate. After the attack, Nick fled the scene. Hours passed before family members realized something was wrong. Romy Reiner, their daughter, went to the house and discovered her father's body first, followed by her mother's. The discovery transformed the private tragedy into a public nightmare, shocking the community and the world. What followed in the hours after the attack added another layer of shock and unease. Nick Reiner was arrested about 6 hours later near the University of Southern California, approximately 15 miles from his home. Surveillance cameras captured him moving calmly, almost ordinarily, as if nothing had happened. He walked into a convenience store, bought a drink, and left without any sign of panic, fear, or guilt. Witnesses who later saw the footage described his demeanor as eerily calm, unnerving even for those familiar with criminal behavior. Psychologists and criminal experts often describe this type of behavior as emotional detachment, where the person seems disconnected from the consequences of their actions. It raises questions about mental health, intent, and awareness. How can someone commit such a violent act and then act in public with no visible sign of distress? For many, it is difficult to understand, almost impossible to reconcile with ordinary human behavior. The calmness, the lack of emotion, and the detachment make the story more disturbing than the crime itself. Meanwhile, the details from the Christmas party and other social interactions began to piece together a pattern. Friends and acquaintances of the family described incidents that at the time seemed unusual, but not dangerous. Nick had been struggling socially, acting in ways that created discomfort, tension, and anxiety among those around him. People who had known the family for years noticed subtle changes. The combination of fear, embarrassment, and confusion made it difficult for outsiders to grasp the depth of the problem. Rob and Michelle had done everything they could to keep Nick close, to supervise him, and to provide help. But even the best efforts sometimes cannot prevent a tragedy when someone is struggling with severe mental instability. The attack, horrific as it was, did not happen in isolation. It was the result of years of underlying problems, mental health challenges, and escalating instability that went largely unseen by the outside world. The nature of the crime itself was deliberate and chilling. Experts analyzing similar cases explain that stabbing or cutting attacks require focus, physical coordination, and intent. Unlike impulsive assaults, which may happen in a single, sudden movement, repeated actions of this kind indicate planning and control. The attacker must overcome resistance, maintain strength, and continue the act despite the physical effort and moral boundaries. In Nick's case, the forensic details suggest that the violence was controlled and sustained, adding a terrifying dimension to an already shocking event. As the story spread through the media, public reaction was intense. People were horrified not only by the crime, but also by the psychological aspects, Nick's calmness, the signs that were missed, and the hidden struggles within a family that seemed perfect from the outside. Discussions about mental health, family dynamics, and the challenges of understanding emotional instability became central to the conversation. Some experts emphasized that wealth and fame cannot shield families from these kinds of tragedies. Resources may provide therapy, medical support, or monitoring, but they do not eliminate the human element, the unpredictability of mental health, the limitations of interventions, and the difficulty of recognizing imminent danger. The Reiner case became a point of reflection for many. People wondered whether warning signs were overlooked, whether intervention could have been more effective, and whether tragedies like this are preventable at all. Each new detail released: Nick's behavior at the party, his methodical approach to the crime, his calmness afterward, painted a more complex picture. The family's struggle with love, fear, and protection became a lens through which the public could view the tragedy. Every narrative, every witness account, added depth to the story, revealing layers of complexity that went beyond the shocking act itself. The psychological dimension became as central to the story as the crime. Mental health experts highlighted the signs of severe instability, social withdrawal, impulsive or erratic behavior, boundary crossing, and emotional detachment as critical warning signs. Families struggling with similar issues are often caught in a difficult balancing act, providing support while maintaining safety. In Nick's case, the struggle tragically ended in the worst possible outcome. The public fascination with the story is understandable. True crime audiences are drawn not just to the event, but to the human and psychological aspects behind it. The Reiner case combines extreme wealth and fame with the very human vulnerabilities of mental health challenges, parental care, and family dynamics. Beyond the immediate horror, the long-term impact of this tragedy is profound. The Reiner family, once a symbol of Hollywood success and stability, is now defined in the public eye by this event. Friends, colleagues, and neighbors have struggled to reconcile the public persona of Rob and Michelle Reiner with the private horror that unfolded in their home. Mental health professionals emphasize that tragedies like this often result from a combination of factors: underlying mental illness, environmental stressors, and missed warning signs. No single factor is enough to explain the full story, and no one could have predicted the exact outcome with certainty. However, looking at the warning signs, Nick's behavior at social gatherings, his escalating instability, and the family's constant monitoring, it becomes clear that the family faced a nearly impossible challenge. Each decision made in love and care carried unintended consequences, and each attempt to protect Nick may have also contributed to the tension and strain that culminated in the tragedy. The public discussion also highlights the limitations of wealth and fame in protecting families from deeply personal crises. While the Reiners had access to some of the best support available, their story proves that human behavior and mental health cannot be fully controlled or predicted. This realization resonates with many families who may face challenges without similar resources, underscoring the universality of the struggle. The psychological aftermath is equally important. Nick's calm demeanor, the brutality of the attack, and the shock of the community create a complex narrative about morality, responsibility, and mental health. People are left asking questions about accountability, awareness, and intervention. Could the tragedy have been prevented? Should more have been done to identify the risk? And how do families balance love, care, and safety when faced with someone struggling with severe instability? The Reiner case also reflects on society's fascination with fame and wealth. Often, people assume that high-profile families live lives removed from everyday challenges. Yet the reality is that wealth cannot prevent personal tragedies. The story humanizes a family that otherwise seemed untouchable, reminding us that mental health struggles, family tension, and tragedy can occur anywhere. For those following the story, the combination of crime, psychology, and human drama makes it both compelling and disturbing. True crime enthusiasts examine not just the act itself, but the warning signs, the planning, and the aftermath. Experts point out that understanding these aspects can provide insights into similar cases, though it cannot change the outcome of past events. Finally, the Reiner tragedy leaves a lasting impact on those connected to the family, the public, and even the viewers who follow the story. It serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of life, the limits of control, and the challenges of understanding human behavior. Families struggling with mental health issues may see reflections of their own fears, while society at large is reminded that appearances can be deceiving. Nick Reiner's actions, while shocking, are part of a broader story about family, instability, and tragedy. The lessons extend beyond Hollywood, showing the importance of early intervention, mental health support, and awareness of warning signs. Though the tragedy cannot be undone, it offers a chance for reflection, discussion, and understanding about human fragility, family bonds, and the unseen struggles that sometimes lead to the most unexpected and heartbreaking outcomes. Nick Reiner did not resist, did not scream, and did not struggle violently when officers approached him. He was forced face down onto the pavement, his hands restrained behind his back. The entire process was quick, almost clinical in its efficiency. Yet what unsettled viewers the most was Nick's unusual calmness. He did not cry, shout, or beg for mercy. Instead, his demeanor suggested a strange acceptance, as if being arrested was a step he had anticipated and resigned himself to long before it happened. Across all the recorded footage, Nick remained silent. No words, no sudden panic, no visible remorse, only an eerie quiet. This silence is heavy, almost oppressive, leaving viewers to wonder what it feels like inside the mind of someone who can walk through life with such calm immediately after crossing moral boundaries. Period. The arrest itself marked the beginning of intense public scrutiny as people tried to piece together the shocking chain of events that led to the alleged murders of his parents. Authorities quickly placed Nick under suicide watch at the Los Angeles County Jail, acknowledging that his psychological state was fragile and unstable. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office officially charged Nick Reiner with 2 counts of murder, claiming that these were not impulsive acts, but deliberate, intentional crimes. At the same time, information surfaced that Nick had been diagnosed with schizophrenia years earlier, a severe mental illness that often leads to hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking, and a loss of motivation. His mental health reportedly worsened in the weeks leading to the crime, with erratic and dangerous behavior that alarmed his mother, Michelle. She confided in friends that the family had tried everything to help Nick, investing both time and resources in attempts to stabilize his life. Treatment had included regular psychiatric supervision, inpatient care at a high-end Los Angeles rehabilitation facility, specializing in dual diagnosis mental health treatment, and significant financial investment, reportedly $70,000 per month, paid by Rob Reiner himself. However, around 3 to 4 weeks before the crime, adjustments to Nick's antipsychotic medication appeared to destabilize his behavior further, a known risk when modifying treatment for schizophrenia. After his arrest, Nick remained under strict psychiatric supervision and suicide watch, yet he was deemed competent to participate in court proceedings. Legal experts predict that his defense team will request a thorough psychiatric evaluation to determine his mental state at the time of the alleged crime. One potential strategy is a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Under California law, such a plea requires the defendant to prove that due to mental illness, he was unable to understand the nature of his actions or recognize that they were wrong. If successful, Nick could be committed to a psychiatric facility instead of receiving a conventional prison sentence, potentially for life. However, experts note that insanity defenses are rarely successful, with fewer than 1% of cases succeeding. If drugs or substances contributed to mental instability, this may further complicate the defense, as substance-induced conditions often do not excuse criminal responsibility. Observations about Nick attending social gatherings shortly before the alleged crimes may also challenge claims that he lacked awareness or understanding, as these events suggest some level of functioning in social settings despite his mental health struggles. This chilling mix of calm during arrest, strong Nick's mental health has long been a central factor in understanding his behavior and alleged crimes. Diagnosed with schizophrenia years before the tragic events, he faced a disorder that severely impacts perception, cognition, and emotional regulation. Schizophrenia often leads to hallucinations, false beliefs about reality, disorganized thoughts, and difficulty with daily functioning. In Nick's case, family, friends, and insiders reported that his condition worsened in the weeks leading up to the alleged murders, with behavior described as erratic, impulsive, and potentially dangerous. His mother, Michelle, had expressed growing concern, feeling that even the most intensive interventions were insufficient to stabilize him. Throughout his life, Nick had been under psychiatric supervision, including stays in high-end rehabilitation facilities designed for dual diagnosis cases, patients with both mental health and substance abuse challenges. These programs are intensive, including medication management, therapy, and monitoring, often at significant financial cost. Adjustments to his antipsychotic medication just weeks before the incident may have destabilized him further, an outcome sometimes seen when treatment for schizophrenia is changed too rapidly. Understanding schizophrenia and its impact on thought processes is crucial when assessing behavior like Nick's. The disorder can alter judgment, perception of reality, and impulse control, making it difficult to predict actions or assign conventional moral responsibility. Psychiatric experts will likely play a critical role in court, offering assessments of his mental state both at the time of the crime and in evaluating his competency to stand trial. This evaluation will examine whether Nick understood the nature of his actions or could differentiate right from wrong at critical moments. Mental illness does not excuse criminal behavior in most cases, but it may reduce culpability or influence sentencing. For viewers trying to comprehend such a tragedy, it emphasizes that human behavior can be profoundly complex, influenced by biology, environment, and experience. The story of Nick Reiner, therefore, is not just about alleged crimes, but also about the challenges of navigating mental illness, the limits of treatment, and the unpredictability of human psychology when combined with personal struggles, addiction, and family dynamics. Nick Reiner's personal history includes a long struggle with addiction, another factor that complicates understanding the events leading to his parents' deaths. He admitted in interviews that he had been using drugs since the age of 15, a formative period when the brain is still developing and decisions can have lifelong consequences. Despite being born into wealth and privilege, Nick's life was marked by instability. He experienced periods of homelessness in several states, including Maine, New Jersey, and Texas, drifting from place to place and struggling to establish stability. Addiction often functions as both a coping mechanism and a source of continued distress, and Nick's case appears to exemplify this duality. Even during brief periods of sobriety, he reportedly felt drawn back into familiar patterns of substance use, reflecting both the physiological grip of addiction and the psychological pull of familiar behavior. Public statements from Nick suggest that he sometimes sought not recovery, but a return to his old lifestyle of drug use, revealing an internal conflict between desire for normalcy and the pull of destructive habits. In the weeks leading up to the alleged murders, family, friends, and acquaintances reported observing signs of instability, exhaustion, distant behavior, and subtle indications that he was struggling with addiction in secret. Employees at a nearby gas station described him as appearing visibly different from the person they had known, noting a quiet but heavy sense that something was wrong. For individuals struggling with addiction, such concealment is not unusual. Hiding substance use from family members can generate immense psychological pressure, eroding emotional stability, and further isolating the individual. This combination of mental illness and addiction likely created a volatile situation in which control over behavior became increasingly fragile. Drugs, in this sense, were no longer a form of indulgence, but a misguided escape, a temporary numbing of pain and anxiety. However, the very act of hiding this struggle may have deepened internal conflict, increasing emotional strain and heightening the risk of destructive behavior. Understanding this context is critical, as it highlights that the tragedy was not simply a single impulsive act, but may have been the result of years of compounding difficulties, unmanaged illness, and ongoing personal struggle. Another factor contributing to the complexity of the case is Nick Reiner's long-standing dependency on his family. Unlike peers who establish independence in their 20s, Nick remained living with his parents well into his 30s, reliant on them for housing, medical treatment, and basic needs. After co-writing the screenplay for Being Charlie in 2015, directed by his father, Nick's professional activity largely disappeared. There were no major projects, stable employment, or career growth, only short-term, often ambiguous opportunities that failed to provide financial independence or a sense of personal achievement. This prolonged unemployment and reliance on family resources created a sense of stasis in his life, further amplifying psychological strain and feelings of inadequacy. Even minor attempts at creative or professional activity were insufficient to establish autonomy. The Reiner family reportedly covered all aspects of Nick's living expenses, including high-cost rehabilitation programs, therapy, and daily necessities. While this support was generous and well-intentioned, it may have inadvertently contributed to dependency, leaving Nick without the experience or confidence to navigate life independently. Periods of homelessness in his youth, combined with ongoing unemployment, suggest a life of prolonged instability and missed opportunities, factors that may have compounded the stress and vulnerability created by his mental health challenges. For audiences, this emphasizes how privilege does not automatically protect against personal struggles addiction, or mental illness. It also underscores the difficult balance families face when supporting members with chronic mental health issues, providing care and resources while encouraging independence, which is often easier said than done. Paragraph 5. Legal strategy and upcoming trial. As the legal proceedings unfold, questions about responsibility, intent, and mental capacity dominate the case. Nick Reiner retained Alan Jackson, a highly experienced criminal defense attorney, to navigate the complex legal terrain. Legal experts predict that a key focus will be evaluating Nick's mental state at the time of the alleged crime and determining whether he had the ability to understand the nature of his actions. A plea of not guilty by reason of insanity may be considered, though such defenses are rarely successful. The defense may also highlight the influence of addiction, recent changes in medication, and the long-standing struggles with mental health as mitigating factors. Meanwhile, prosecutors are likely to emphasize deliberate intent, planning, and the severity of the alleged actions. The courtroom strategy will require careful management of evidence, psychological assessments, and controlling the flow of information. Public scrutiny and media coverage further complicate the situation, as high-profile cases often influence perception even before trial. The case raises challenging questions about how the legal system addresses mental illness, addiction, and the capacity for criminal intent. It also forces society to consider where responsibility lies when illness, long-term instability, and environmental factors intersect in ways that may lead to tragedy. For viewers, the upcoming trial represents not just a legal battle, but a deeper investigation into human behavior, family dynamics, and the boundary between crime and illness. Ultimately, the Nick Reiner case forces reflection on human behavior, responsibility, and the limits of support systems. This is not merely a story of alleged murder, but a chronicle of mental illness, addiction, family dependence, and societal intervention, or the lack thereof. From his calm arrest, through years of addiction and instability, to the legal strategies now unfolding, the case illustrates how tragedy often develops over long periods, rather than occurring in a single instant. For viewers, it raises important questions. Could mental illness explain actions that otherwise seem incomprehensible? What responsibility do families, communities, and legal systems bear when early warning signs go unheeded? And ultimately, how should society weigh intent against incapacity when evaluating human behavior? The upcoming trial will explore these questions in court, with jurors tasked with determining the extent to which Nick's mental state influenced the alleged crime. Until then, the public watches, reflects, and debates, navigating the uncomfortable space between compassion, accountability, and justice. As new details emerge, audiences will continue to analyze and discuss, forming opinions based on incomplete information, while the full truth slowly comes to light behind courtroom doors. This story, while tragic, also serves as a reminder of the complexity of human life, the consequences of long-term mental health struggles, and the enduring challenge of balancing empathy with the need for accountability.